Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Liberty Weekly podcast. I'm your host, as always, Patrick McFarland. This one is episode 161, and the show notes page may be found at libertyweekly.net/161. I wanted to remind you as well that Liberty Weekly is featured on the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org, alongside other great podcasts and articles, including podcasts by Scott Horton, Keith Knight, Kyle Anzalone, Pete Quinones, and Tommy Salmons. So today I wanted to drop an appearance that I made on Blackbird with James Jenneman. James is a friend of mine. We've actually known each other in the Twin Cities for a couple of years now. But he invited me on his show, and I really enjoyed that appearance and the conversation that we had. And I thought it would be, especially prescient right now with the talk of the COVID vaccine passports. Because although we didn't discuss vaccine passports specifically, we did talk about a lot of the things going on with COVID, but also the constitutionality of COVID-19. Well, the constitutionality of vaccines came up, and I talked about a case called Jacobson versus Massachussetts that basically ruled yes, mandatory vaccinations are constitutional. And I'm pretty sure that will come up if there's ever a constitutional challenge or a vaccine mandate. However, of course, it looks like the direction that they're going to go is not really make it law that you have to get vaccinated, but make it so difficult to be a part of society without getting the vaccine that it will make you go in that direction and make you be vaccinated. So I hope you really enjoy this episode. I'm not going to be doing a mid-roll, but I wanted to start off just by making some housekeeping announcements. So my first major article is going to be published on the Libertarian Institute this week. I've been teasing it, but it is a deep, in-depth dive on the Uyghur genocide issue. It's about 6 pages long, maybe even 7 pages, because I have some updating to do. So I go really in-depth. I talk about Tim Pool and things I've discussed on the show before, and him really doing the Chinese fear-mongering. So I'm going to be releasing that releasing that article hopefully early to mid-week this week. I'm going to be appearing on Conflicts of Interest with Kyle Anzalone to talk about this issue, and I'm really excited for that. We're going to, hopefully the article will be published by then, but we're going to discuss it with Kyle Anzalone and Will Porter over there. So I also made an appearance on the Individualist podcast with Nick Ashley, and we talked about a lot of things, but a lot of things that I don't usually talk about. Likewise, I appeared on No Way Jose, and we discussed the first episode, or the first part in a 3-part series of something we're going to do on the Monopoly on Violence. So we discussed the first part of the film. I think you're really going to like that. We also discussed some things about unschooling that I've never discussed on the podcast here before. So I'll drop those links in the show notes page at /161. Also, you know how to support this show. That is one-stop shop at libertyweekly.net /support. You can go there. I have Patreon, Subscribestar. You can subscribe for crypto on float.app and get Patreon bonuses that way. Or you can follow the Liberty Weekly podcast on Odyssey at libertyweekly.net /Odyssey, ODYSEE. I release exclusive content there that I don't release anywhere else, not in any podcast feed or on YouTube or any other video platform. So be sure to check that out. You can donate LBC to my channel for free. You get it through using Odyssey. It doesn't cost you anything, but it also really helps other people see my content because Odyssey works by people investing crypto in the content they like, and it signals to the network that other eyeballs should be on it as well. So that's a great way to support my show. Okay, so I really think you'll enjoy this one. I'm going to be doing an episode on John Hasness's The Myth of the Rule of Law, because it's so important to libertarian legal theory as well this week. So I'll release this one, and then I think I'll release that one on Wednesday or Thursday. All right, well, here we go. Without further ado, here's my appearance on Blackbird with James Jenneman.
Welcome to Blackbird episode number 16. My name is James, and today I am joined by Patrick McFarlane from Liberty Weekly. Patrick and I have known each other for a few years, and I wanted to invite him on to just kind of shoot the breeze. The interview took place on February 13th, so it's been a little while since we recorded. Hopefully everything is still topical. I just got kind of backlogged on my interview recording. Before we get started, let me tell you once again about Paloma Verde CBD. Paloma Verde was founded by a friend of the show and previous guest, Carlos Avilar, and his wife, Vanessa. You know all about the benefits of CBD by now. It can provide pain relief, it can provide sleep help, it can provide all of the benefits of marijuana without the side effect of getting you high and, in my case, completely non-functional. So I've benefited from it. My very favorite product is the mint tincture, which I love. It tastes delicious. The gummies are also really good. So I highly recommend you go to palomaverdestore.com. Make sure to use offer code BLACKBIRD at checkout to get 25% off your order. And with that, here is my interview with Patrick McFarlane. All right, Patrick, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, so we've known each other for a couple of years now, just kind of being fellow Upper Midwesterners. But for those who aren't as familiar with you, why don't you kind of give a rundown of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I am a libertarian attorney. I'm currently admitted to the bar in Wisconsin. I've been practicing for about 2 years and some change now. Since my second year in law school, or first year, I've been running a libertarian blogging site called Liberty Weekly, and that's at libertyweekly.net. And so on there, I post a bunch of things about the law, libertarian legal theory, but I also dabble in a host of other topics. So you can check out my work there.
Awesome. And your podcast was recently relaunched, right?
Yeah, I took a bit of a hiatus because my son was born, and things got really hectic with work and everything. But I also I ran out of things to talk about, and then all of a sudden COVID happened, and I felt like I couldn't just stand back on the sidelines.
Yeah. So what? Obviously, you kind of take the libertarian position on COVID. What are some of the implications other than just like a virus and lockdowns? Where do you see the society going as far as Great Reset and all that stuff?
I mean, I'm pretty black-pilled, and I've always kind of been. If people go back into my archives and listen to a bunch of stuff, I listened to a lot of Peter Schiff when I first got into the liberty space. So I was very, the big crash is coming, but I think that we haven't even begun to see the effects of COVID that have hit our society. I think there's cultural effects. Certain things with children not being able to, being stunted in their development, being stunted in education, not being able to be socially acclimatized. We haven't even begun to see those effects yet, not to mention effects of supply chain disruptions that are occurring right now. I was just reading an article about how international shipping is at a complete backup right now, and it's more advantageous to ship empty shipping crates back to China in the Far East, and so that's a big problem because you're not getting the reciprocity with these shipping bins and all these international shipping. The ports are just backed up. And I've been talking to some of my friends who work in the industries like plumbing and other, kind of support industries, construction, things like that. And they're saying that materials are super expensive. If you've tried to build anything with like wood lately, lumber is incredibly expensive. And I think these things are just going to get worse. And we haven't seen the effects of inflation. I think that, the price of milk, for instance, staples like milk, butter, and eggs are going to go sky high. And I'm just, not to mention all of the commissar kind of USSR Soviet style peace and reconciliation commissions that I think that we're facing. But on top of that, possibility of gun control. I mean, there's so much to go after, but I think that we really are sitting at the dawn of a new domestic war on terrorism. And that might be the most frightening development, even though everything that I named just now is pretty damn frightening.
Yeah, that's a lot of stuff. Let's start from the very first thing, though, because you're the father of a young kid. Have you noticed any of the? And I don't want you to get too emotional on this, but obviously it hits close to home. Have you noticed the impacts of, even something as small as, getting scared of an adult when they take off their mask or whatever? I've heard of kids having really, really weird adverse reactions to that.
I haven't. And I'm not too, it's not too emotional for me, maybe because I haven't noticed anything, but my son, he's almost 2 years old. We do take him to daycare, which I'm not super thrilled about, but it's necessity. But thankfully our daycare is more of I know they're Christian and they incorporate Christian teachings into everything. They've kind of played along with the masking, but his teachers don't wear masks and the other children don't wear masks. And when they get to the older ages, I think like pre-K, I think they make them wear masks. I'm not sure, but I don't know how you make a 2-year-old wear a mask or a 3 or a 4-year-old. So thankfully, we haven't noticed anything like that with him.
That's good. I saw 2 little girls playing in a backyard wearing masks. It broke my heart. Like I can't imagine what kind of parent would force their daughters to wear masks playing outside. Like, yeah. Unless it's the kids. Like, if they're so brainwashed this quickly into it, then, kids tend to kind of, they learn, and then what they've learned, it stays learned. So what was the second thing you said? There was the cultural things. What do you think, as far as like policy goes, lockdowns and masks and, occupancy restrictions and stuff like that, what gets lifted, what gets modified, and what's here to stay?
Oh, that's a great question. I think this will all, what I've been saying to people, especially when I go into a place without a mask and they, I'm kind of that jerk where I'll go into places like Woodman's as a grocery store chain around here that's employee owned, and they have signs right outside saying, no mask, no entry and stuff like that. I go in just to test the waters and put the onus on them, and they do say something, but I always say, this is here to stay until we decide that we're not going to go along with it anymore. And I think, that goes along with 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and then it just progressed from there more and more times. So I think in areas of the state where people are not going along with it, it's not here to stay. I think it is just in, we'll kind of half-ass through the motions, and we'll fight it in every way that we know how. But in other more urban places, I think it's here to stay for years. I think masking is here to stay for years. I think double masking is here to stay for years, and it's not going to go away, even if 75% of the population is vaccinated. Yeah,
thankfully, there's some pockets. Like, I live in Minneapolis where it's mask central, but like I went to my theft appointment at H&R Block today, and like my tax guy he goes, I'm so tired of this shit, and I was like, yeah, whatever. So we did the tax appointment essentially maskless. They were down on our chins just in case someone else came in, but like I think that's the thing. Like, so many people kind of see through the bullshit and still go along with it out of, I don't know, I guess it's virtue signaling, really.
Yeah, in a way I agree, but I'm going to allude to, I did this interview with I can't remember which episode number it was, but I had someone who escaped communist Romania on my show, and she told her story about growing up in a communist country. And there's a lot of parallels that I see with that, where people, to a point, they do what they can. Like, for instance, so in her country, the only way really to get ahead was to participate in the black market. And there were certain things that you needed out of necessity. And I think that when it comes to the mask orders, there's going to be practicality and necessity that is going to spur people to go against these policies, to go against the mask orders and everything else. When their businesses start failing, when they get to a point where there's certain things that are impractical to do with the mask on or social distancing orders, and it's that practicality that is going to force people to disobey.
Are you familiar with the concept of Ketman, maybe? It's
no, I'm not.
So apparently it's considered like a mental self-defense. Curtis Yarvin just wrote about it last week, and it's pretty interesting. I think it originates in Islam, where Muslims would pretend to be like Orthodox Muslims in order to avoid persecution, but in real life, behind the scenes, they're, quote, breaking the rules.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're seeing a lot of that.
Yeah, for sure. And another thing is like this concept of Jack Mormonism. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the other side of my family, they're devout Mormons, not the most devout, but they follow the practices of the church. They have their recommends. They go to temple and everything like that. But there is a certain subset of Mormons who participate in the culture, but they will, behind closed doors, they are a bit more loose, and they're called Jack Mormons. And I'm not as familiar with it to know if they go to temple and have their recommends and do everything like that. But yeah, I think that's exactly what it is that outwardly you go along to get along, but behind closed doors, and when it really matters, you throw that out the window.
So the last part of your answer was about supply chains, which is probably the most practically scary thing. Obviously Austrian economists will frequently talk about inflation as kind of trickling down from the means of production to the consumer goods. We haven't really seen too much of that. Do you think it's coming now?
I think I think it's coming down the pipe. I'm not going to pretend that I'm, any kind of expert economist or anything like that, but I think there's a lot of magic that the Fed does to try and hide the inflation. But yeah, in terms of that, we see it in certain specific things. I think we see it in the cost of steel, the cost of lumber specifically. I know that real estate prices are through the roof right now, and I'm just wondering when it's going to show up. And anecdotally, I can say that gas prices are starting to rise, but I think that has more to do with Joe Biden's policies. But anecdotally, I feel like my grocery bill is a lot higher.
I don't think I've noticed that yet, which is, I'm sure it's coming. But maybe here in the cities, we've got a little bit more time. I don't really know. And, you never know. Like you said, the Fed magic, especially with MMT kind of becoming a more popular, I guess, and more accepted by at least the political class. It's very convenient for them if they've got infinite money that they can just print. Obviously, it leads to disaster. But do you think that? Nixon's famous for saying we're all Keynesians now. Do you think we're all MMTers now?
As a practical matter, yeah, I think so, because you have Janet Yellen, who's at the head of the Treasury. I can't believe that she's back. I should have figured, these swamp critters they hang around and they get into other positions. But as a practical matter, I think we are, in terms of the predominant kind of, theory behind the people at the levers of power.
Let's take a second to recognize the fact, though, that we do have our first female Treasury Secretary. So there is that.
Yes, we're definitely on top of everything. Janet Yellen, we have our first Treasury Secretary, and yep, we're on it. We'll circle back to that.
Yeah, it's good to hear. Good to know. Okay. All right. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. So you recently interviewed Michael Bolden of the 10th Amendment Center, who everyone loves, like literally, except for a few lefty activists. Anyway, but in that interview, you mentioned that you wrote a paper in law school on the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, which is something that I wanted to ask Tom Woods about. But since I've got you, and you've actually been to law school, why don't you, first of all, tell us what the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions were?
Okay, so after the Constitution was ratified, there was kind of a reformation of political lines. So before the Constitution was ratified, it was kind of like, we had the Hamiltonian Federalists and kind of the proponents of more centralized power under the new Constitution. And James Madison was kind of more on the side of John Adams and Alexander Hamilton and those types. And then the Federalists got in power, especially with the second president, John Adams, and the National Bank was really the first thing that came up that really tested constitutional bounds. And once James Madison really realized that Alexander Hamilton and the other Federalists were aiming to exploit the ambiguous clauses in the Constitution, things like the General Welfare Clause, James Madison became concerned, and he kind of left the Federalists and joined up with Thomas Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans. And this is all occurring kind of in the background of the French Revolution, and there was a lot of mistrust going around. And this should sound pretty familiar in terms of the Trump presidency and these allegations of Russian collusion. Well, back then it was allegations of French collusion. And the Federalists really despised Thomas Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans because they believed, that the Democratic Republicans, they favored France. They later changed their minds when they were horrified by the murderous Jacobins. And Thomas Jefferson wrote about this. But at the time, they saw, France was our friend. France helped us through the revolution. A lot of people felt fealty and loyalty to France. However, the Federalist fears were really trumped up, and there wasn't any support. There wasn't any evidence for this, but the Federalists were afraid because the Federalists held power in the country. The Federalists controlled the Congress. They had a Federalist presidency. But Thomas Jefferson was the vice president at the time because the tickets were formed differently, where the second vote became the vice president. So the Federalists were very concerned that the Democratic Republicans would be getting together with the French and starting some kind of a coup in the country and overtaking it. Totally unfounded. There was worries that Thomas Jefferson and his agents would be directing French frigates to land on the east coast of the United States and march on the Capitol. And at the time, the Democratic Republicans, they were printing inflammatory things in magazines and publications and pamphlets across the country against the Federalists. And so the Federalists wanted to pass the Alien and Sedition Acts, and pretty famous, blatantly unconstitutional, blatantly violated the First Amendment. And the Alien and Sedition Acts basically jailed folks for political speech. It also sought to remove immigrants or foreign nationals from the United States. And that was very much targeted towards Democratic Republicans in the legislature who were not citizens. Gallatin, I think it was Albert Gallatin, was the minority leader of the House, I believe, at the time, and this was specifically aimed at him. So essentially, you have the Alien and Sedition Acts passed. A lot of it was largely symbolic. However, there were famous prosecutions of high-figure Democratic Republican politicians. Benjamin Franklin Bosch, the grandson of Benjamin Franklin, was famously tried under the Alien and Sedition Acts. And basically what the Democratic Republicans did was they used these trials where people were tried under the Alien and Sedition Acts. It was only like 150 people, and there were profile trials where the Democratic Republicans use them as political show trials, basically, to demonstrate the point of its unconstitutionality. So basically, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison got together, and they were very concerned that the Federalists were exploiting things in the Constitution, exploiting these clauses in the Constitution. And they thought about the different methods that they had designed, James Madison being the father of the Constitution, all these methods. And Thomas Jefferson, I believe, was in France at the time the Constitution was written. So he had an understanding, he's Thomas Jefferson. He had an understanding of the Constitution, but also of the Declaration of Independence. So there was really this fight between the compact understanding of the Constitution and the Federalist version of the Constitution, and the compact being that the separate state, or the several colonies, the states, came together to form a federal government, a general government, and that they delegated very specific and enumerated powers to this federal constitution. The idea being that the states came as separate parties and they came together to form a compact to create the federal government. The Federalists didn't see it this way. The Federalists believe, that all the states were yoked together under this the federal government, and that they couldn't just leave. The power could not vacate from the federal government and go back to the states in the way that, we have this idea of popular sovereignty where the people delegate their own power to the government for certain specific purposes. If the government doesn't do what if the government steps outside their delegated powers, the powers then go back to the people. And so Jefferson and Madison got together in secret, and they conspired together to write these resolutions that were passed in Kentucky and Virginia. And in these resolutions, they ghost wrote them. They didn't announce or sign their name on it. They articulated their view of the Constitution, and they said, when the federal government steps outside the powers that are explicitly delegated to them, nullification is the rightful remedy. Those are Thomas Jefferson's words. So in that understanding is that the states are duty bound to interpose against unconstitutional laws, and they are to refuse to carry out, they refuse to enforce it. They are to declare resolutions. Ideally, each state who refused it would declare a resolution declaring the act unconstitutional, saying that they would refuse to enforce it, and that was the rightful remedy. And if it went further, Thomas Jefferson said that nullification was an intermediate remedy, whereas secession being the ultimate remedy if a state did not believe in the constitutionality of a specific law or policy, that secession was the rightful answer. So thanks for indulging me in that long answer, but that's the 10,000 foot view of what the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions are.
So did those resolutions pass?
They did. They passed in Kentucky and Virginia, I believe.
How did it happen that the sort of Hamiltonian Federalists, I suppose, sort of like won the day? Did that take until the Civil War, or was that position fairly popular even in the first 20 years?
You mean the Civil Wars in 1865, or?
Yeah, when Lincoln declared that our forefathers brought forth to this continent a new nation, mm-hmm. That seems to be different from this compact theory of the Constitution, where it's not really a nation, it's a collection of independent, nations, if you can even call the states and colonies nations. It seems more like a disparate collection of things rather than one nation.
Right. And I think that really the impression that I got in studying my paper and reading the literature on the subject was that the Federalists were really represented the old aristocracy. And, especially, I know that John or Alexander Hamilton was not necessarily well, he was an aristocrat. He didn't come from the old money, but the Federalist Party itself represented those entrenched interests, the ones that had been there, masters of business, connected people. In fact, in the debates over the Constitution, famously, John Adams, I believe it was, declared that we needed a president, we needed a king, just like King George was a king, that the United States needed a king. They had proposed a very federalized a very centralized government. And I believe I had that. I should link to the paper that I wrote about this in the show notes page.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Send me a link and I'll post it.
Yeah, I will for sure. And so, I mean, that's kind of where it was. There was this certain idea supported by the Federalists and Samuel Adams and Alexander Hamilton. They greatly admired the English system, and they sought to replicate it in the Constitution. It's
amazing how history rhymes. I mean, you said that it sounds a lot like the Russia collusion sort of narrative. And I mean, it really does. Like, even down to the point where the Alien and Sedition Acts are, I mean, right now, obviously the Congress isn't passing laws where they're like censoring people and throwing them in jail, but the public square is, banning people from the main channels of communication for saying the wrong thing, speaking against the wrong people.
It is crazy. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask if you see that as parallel, and also what you think about that. I mean, are Twitter and Facebook just private companies that are, free to censor as they see fit? Are they arms of the state? Are they something in between?
I think that there's something in between. And, I think it's fair to say that libertarians don't have, this is a bit of a gap in our understanding and strategy here. It's been said so many times that these tech giant companies, they're in bed with the government. They get handouts from the government. There's questions about where the seed money initially came for like things like Facebook and
especially Google.
Yes. Yeah. And, you could get into DARPA and all those different things. So I do kind of see them as an arm of the state. I think in our fascist system, and I don't mean fascist system as in, Antifa would imagine it. I mean fascism as literally the Mussolini kind of merger of state and industry. I think that's what we have in this country. But moreover, with I think the answer really is to innovate. And I think that it is a creative way to control speech in the public square is, okay, well, we have all this case law protecting the First Amendment. I wouldn't be surprised if there was an amendment to the Constitution that an amendment to the Bill of Rights saying, to the First Amendment saying, okay, well, hate speech is not protected under the First Amendment, or they could just create that in case law with SCOTUS.
Because I was going to say, you don't really need an amendment when case law is sort of the real supreme law of the land.
Yeah, exactly. We could talk about that too, if you want another 15-minute rant. But
rant. What? Well, no, let's finish this topic though. I think, I just from a strategic standpoint, I think that libertarians need to stop thinking of libertarianism as an ism and start thinking of it more as a community that, I mean, sure, we'll welcome all comers. And, I'm trying not to make this a libertarian podcast. And it seems like every single episode is so libertarian heavy. But this goes for any sort of free thinking movement, community of people, whatever. Whether you're a Dave Rubin follower or a Murray Rothbard follower or whatever follower, innovating does not mean creating the next Google. It means creating something that works better for you than Google. and then, attracting the maybe small number of people who will also benefit from it. I mean, most people are going to continue using Google until Google doesn't work well for them.
Right? Yeah, I mean, for instance, I use DuckDuckGo, but I get frustrated because I don't believe DuckDuckGo gives me the results that I want. I don't think it's as good of a search platform, but yeah, I'll harp on library. I love library and Odyssey. And I think that everything is summed up in a tweet that they put out a few weeks ago. I don't know if I can remember it offhand. I'm going to butcher it, but basically it said only describe library as an alternative to YouTube. I'm going to butcher it. Don't compare library to YouTube, because that's like comparing a horse and buggy to an automobile.
Yeah.
And that's the way I think we need to be thinking.
Well, I love Odyssey, and I just wish that I need to develop the habit of linking to Odyssey instead of to YouTube, because I sit here all day with YouTube playing in the background. I work from home, and it's what I do. But yeah, I publish every episode of my podcast onto YouTube and Odyssey. And I mean, hell, you make a little bit of money from publishing to Odyssey and then just watching videos on it. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer. And then speaking of search engines, in addition to Odyssey, there's a new search engine called Presearch, which is also I don't know if the search engine itself is blockchain based, but it does have a token that each search gives you like a quarter of one of their tokens. So that might be worth looking into, and I'll be sure to link to that as well. Jack Spirko has been really talking about it on the Survival podcast a lot lately.
I'm cutting your workout with the show notes here. My buddy just told me about Presearch today, and so I'm intrigued. I'm going to learn a lot more about it.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Also, so you described yourself as black-pilled earlier, but also you have this libertarian golden age thesis. So, maybe you're not quite as black-pilled as you think.
No, I think you're right, but I'm trying to find the white pills in all of it. I think that I got really excited because for years we've been waiting for mass adoption of these alternatives that we were just discussing. Library, Odyssey, IPFS. We were chatting pre-show about this, and MeWe's meh, or Mastodon, Liberdon, Mastodon, what have you. Minds, I could keep going. Float.app. But I got excited because with everything that's been happening, I labeled this the dawn. My article is For a New Libertarian Golden Age, the dawn of an agorist internet. And I really have been identifying people who are voting with their feet in being part of the change and seeking these alternatives, in part because of necessity. But I think there's massive opportunity here, and I would posit that we're really sitting in an era like the Wild West age of the internet. And I think that these things are going to go in cycles. So, if you were on the internet in the early 90s, you were on dial-up, but it was the Wild West. People were on email chains, people were on forums, they were doing all these different things, and information was abound and it was flowing. Now I think that with big tech, it was the same way when YouTube first came out. You'd have cat videos, and then you'd have 9/11 conspiracy stuff, and you'd have Alex Jones stuff. And I think that we're at an era where people are actually moving into these alternatives, and these alternatives are they're reinventing. Like library is a car compared to YouTube horse and buggy, and it's exciting. We're getting in at the ground floor in that, and there's something to be white pilled about and optimistic about there.
Well, I just interviewed the founders of Float. The episode's not out yet, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to publish it before this one, so I can probably let all their stuff out. Good. That Float.app right now looks like looks just like Twitter, but they've got all kinds of stuff down the pike. Like, you know, I mean, they're tokenizing, so they're going to have their own cryptocurrency, which, you know, may or may not be, you know, worth investing in. But they're going to have a POS system that is not only for online purchases, but for brick and mortar businesses as well. They've already got a sandwich store with 70 locations under contract. They're building a whole movement and a whole infrastructure for e-commerce, regular commerce, social networking. They've got streaming, which even Odyssey doesn't have video streaming yet.
They will this week.
Oh, really?
Or
that's good. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
So by the time
buy your LBC now.
Yeah. So by the time this posts, that should be in place. So good. I misspoke. But yeah, I think you're right about this golden age. Necessity. What is it? Necessity breeds innovation, something like that. And what recourse do the authoritarians, whether they're the state or the you know, globalist elite, or just, you know, your friendly neighborhood misguided BLM activist, what recourse do they have against the geniuses in the room? You know?
Well, I think maybe the only recourse they would have is that I do worry a little bit about these new platforms being an echo chamber. Mm-hmm. That being said, I think that James Corbett put this the right way, is that, you know, we're going to be the trendsetters. We're going to create the space. And then once people, you know, get sick of being on, you know, legacy tech platforms, they're going to realize that all the cool kids are doing our thing over here, and they will start adopting it. But when they do start adopting it, it will be a libertarian space that we've created. And I think there's a lot of value in that.
That's true. But, you know, I mean, Twitter and Facebook started out nominally libertarian-ish. I mean, and you know, it's still as awful as he is, Jack Dorsey still has libertarian instincts. I mean, he's all in on Bitcoin, obviously, but also, you know, Twitter is building that. I think it's called Blue Sky, something like that. It's a decentralized social network platform. I think it's similar to Mastodon, where you can kind of build your own social networks based on its engine. So I do wonder what's to stop these so-called free speech platforms from going the way of Facebook if they get too big. Do you think that's a concern?
Yeah, I think I think it's always a concern. I think in the same way that, you know, Thomas Jefferson famously, I think it was Thomas Jefferson, is that the tree of liberty needs to be watered from time to time with the blood of tyrants. I think there's a constant struggle between the corrupting forces of power. It's kind of like the Lord of the Rings allegory. I think what they're really trying to do is build it into the code that essentially there will be no possibility of doing that, in the same way that cryptocurrencies are built in. The main thing about Bitcoin is that theoretically it can't be controlled by anyone. And, you know, if these platforms do it right, they could make it that way. For example, library, the library blockchain is public and available to anyone. And if Library or Odyssey, if they start censoring people, there's nothing stopping anyone from creating their own instance of Odyssey using the library blockchain to access the content that's permanently on it.
Right.
So there's a possibility like that.
That's what I'm a huge like Ethereum fanboy. I guess I'm not like an Ether maximalist or whatever, but I think that Ethereum has even more promise than Bitcoin as far as like world changing potential. But Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, he's kind of a woke SJW-ish person. Oh. And he's not as bad as, you know, just any run-of-the-mill NYT or CNN journalist, but you know, I mean, he's got woke leanings, and that's fine because the platform that he developed isn't even. I mean, it's not even really a platform. It's just a technology that is universally applicable and completely censorship resistant. And I love that about that. And I love about him that he recognizes that and celebrates it, that even things that he personally finds deplorable, which I find, milquetoast, can still exist on his platform. So that's why I think that the decentralized things are, and I don't know much about how decentralized technology works. Like, I'm not a technologist. So like, I don't really know how Telegram and Signal and that sort of thing work. But I do know that when things are distributed among, millions and millions of computers rather than in one central location, it's really, really tough to oppress them and suppress them. So that's where I think the most promise is. Do you know much about the interplanetary file system, IPFS, or do you know enough about it to at least kind of describe what the hell it is?
Yeah, I think so. I'll take a stab at it. I'm also not a technologist. I like to say what my dad likes to say is he has this saying where he's like, I know enough to be dangerous, which I think has the implication that like I know enough to get in and really screw things up.
Well, you've already quoted Thomas Jefferson, which, in a few years will probably get you thrown in prison. So
probably.
Let's get dangerous for just a minute.
So, okay.
In Minecraft.
Right. Well, okay. So my understanding is that basically in the same way that HTTP is a way that the internet is structured itself, where you are accessing files. IPFS is a protocol that you use. So instead of putting HTTP in your address bar, you put IPFS. Okay. And essentially what it is storing, it's a peer-to-peer internet, basically, where you're not accessing files from a centralized server. I believe it's that people are independent, people with their desktop computers are hosting instances of web pages on the whole thing. So instead of having a centralized server, it's that the entire network is hosting internet files. And from my understanding, that's the way the internet was originally meant to be. And in some way, it's baffling that the internet has become what it is, which is centralized website storage, because decentralized website storage is way faster, from my understanding. So I hope that makes sense. I hope I'm right about that.
Yeah, well, and I mean, when the internet was developed, it wouldn't have really been feasible because there were so few computers, and what computers existed just didn't have the storage capacity for that kind of thing. I mean, my very first computer in 1997, so you were a little kid, but I was a seventh grader, and it had a 6.5 gigabyte hard drive, and that was huge. Like, how could you ever possibly fill 6.5 gigabytes? I did it with porn, but I mean, that was after a few years, and I upgraded to a 10 gig hard drive and didn't need another one until, more years after that. So I think that's probably part of it. The technology is just advanced now that, in such a way that it's feasible and affordable and workable.
I think it is. I do recall, though, I don't know if this was on the Corbett Report or something else, is that he did like a questions for Corbett. I'm a huge Corbett fanboy, by the way. I got a shout out on the Greater Reset during Corbett's his presentation. Oh yeah,
they were going to take questions from the audience. They only took one question from the audience, and it was me. And it was because I had interviewed Derek Brose the day before the Greater Reset. And so they saw my name and they're like, oh, it's James from the Blackbird podcast who just interviewed Derek Brose. The Derek Brose interview has more hits than any other, by far, than any other of my episodes. So
wow, that's wonderful.
I know, it's pretty cool. So Corbett fans, thanks for visiting. Please subscribe.
I owe a lot to Corbett, not only because he inspired me to do my show, but episode 14 of my show was entitled Economics, Eugenics, and the Minimum Wage. And he linked to it in one of his subscriber newsletters.
Ooh,
and
that's fantastic.
That got a lot of traffic. to my new, so libertyweekly.net/14. I'll always remember that. So.
I haven't listened to it yet. I didn't start going down that rabbit hole until I heard Monica Perez on the Dave Smith show. Part of the problem. So Monica was sort of she wasn't my red pill. I would say that Tom Woods and Lou Rockwell are my red pill, but Monica Perez was my rabbit stew pill or whatever. Down the, and I hesitate to call it even conspiracy theories. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not like James Corbett is going on and, talking about the Freemasons and the Illuminati and stuff. He's talking about real life stuff. Monica Perez is just analyzing the news. It's no different, as far as I'm concerned, to Scott Horton, who just connects dots. Yeah,
and I love James's. The whole idea of his show. He had one of his first interviews. He was on the Ripple Effect podcast, and he always, I don't know, he points to that to say, okay, this is what the Corbett Report is all about. And this is what my idea is of like who runs the world and everything. He said basically what his show is open source intelligence news, is that you'd be amazed at what is open. Intelligence agencies across the world, they get their intelligence from open sources. You'd think it's some kind of cloak and dagger clandestine intel they're getting. In fact, usually that information is false, and they end up, blowing up the wrong village or bombing a wedding. But I digress. So that's what the whole idea of the project is.
So, and that kind of brings me to a conversation you had with Keith Knight here recently, where you mentioned that your grandfather was John Bircher.
Oh yeah.
So I didn't know much about John Birch until I saw Jordan Peterson here in Minneapolis live, and it was the one time he ever had a heckler for his entire that world tour he did that was cut short by his mental illness and his wife's cancer. But someone stood up during his presentation and said, "This is all John Birch propaganda." And I had no idea what John Birch was. Was your grandpa like a conspiracy kook, or were the John Birchers were they legit?
So my grandfather was a bit of a conspiracy kook. I mean, granted, he died when I was a year old, so my greatest wish is to sit down and have a 6-hour conversation with him. However, that's not possible. But the John Birch Society was started in Appleton, Wisconsin. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it's interesting about that. But so I mean, they're described as radical and far right, but I mean, they essentially what they are very radical anti-communists. And in a way, you could say that they were, they were involved with McCarthyism in a certain way. They're kind of paleoconservatives, but they're anti-war. And, they have conservative values from what I understand. But yeah, I think G. Edward Griffin is a John Bircher, or at least he spoke a lot at John Birch events. There's a lot of talk about, the Federal Reserve and like the creature from Jekyll Island, stuff like that. Now, I'm not aware that I don't believe it gets into anything about a Jewish conspiracy specifically. But I mean, it's your run of the mill New World Order kind of federal or anti-Federal Reserve kind of stuff.
Sure. So are they known for being anti-Semitic or Jewish conspiracy theorists? Like I said, I know nothing about them. So
yeah, I mean, to be honest, I have not done a whole bunch of researching into the John Birch Society, and I always figured that, well, Thomas Massey was a John Birch Society.
Sure. And he's the best congressman other than Ron Paul. I totally agree. Centuries.
Totally agree. I would say their detractors say maybe that they are, anti. You know how, if you're anti-banker,
dude, everybody's anti-Semitic. I get it. Like,
yep, exactly. So I think so, and I have some of his old pamphlets that he would hand out. And I'm holding one in my hands. It's called, I mentioned this on my other show, but it's called Billions for the Bankers and Debts for the People. The real
Oh,
cause of
okay.
inflation.
So that's where they might get the anti-Semitic vibe, even though it's. I mean, I'm a libertarian and I'm anti-banker. Like, I'm even anti-bank. I don't. I mean, you know, I would have no problem with a society where usury was looked down upon.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't support legislation to that effect, but you know, I mean, I'm much more into, hey, can I borrow $10 or hey, can I borrow $100,000?
You must like decentralized finance cryptos,
Dude. You have
Yeah.
no idea. Like, I think so. I'm heavily invested. Other than Bitcoin and Ether, actually, I think I have more Chainlink than Ether at this point, thanks to Pavel, who is a previous guest on the show, and I think he's on in the next few weeks. Chainlink is sort of the oracle that, and I don't want to try to get too technical because I don't understand it, but it's an Ethereum based thing that like facilitates DeFi transactions and also the smart contracts. Don't quote me, but yeah, DeFi to me is like the wave of the future. I think it's so awesome.
Oh yeah, I'm very excited at that. I'm very excited at the prospect of, you know, I'm staking, you know, I got in on Cardano before when it was still like 30 cents. Excuse me. I got in when it was like 20 cents and now it's pushing $1. And I'm very happy, but from my understanding, Cardano is kind of the same idea. I think it's in competition with Chainlink.
Yes, I've heard that.
But for those who aren't familiar with decentralized finance, I think it's basically the idea that people stake their Cardano or they stake their cryptocurrency, and anyone who's applying for financing or a loan, they take out your staked Cardano or DeFi, right? Am I right at that?
Don't get me talking about that. I have no idea.
Well, yeah.
There's another like there's a app called BlockFi where you can actually, you know, just put your crypto into this sort of pool, and I mean it's basically just you're issuing loans, and I think I might have an affiliate link to that.
Well, send it my way because I want to get a BlockFi account. However, I'm a little concerned. It's like, you know, I signed up for Bitrex, so I'm on the Bitrex exchange, and I signed up like 4 years ago. I just don't want to give out my ID, you know, to so many people.
Yeah, that's the problem with living in the United States is that, I mean, the KYC laws here are insane. Mm-hmm. Like I was saying earlier, I was at my tax appointment today, and the guy was talking about, you know, crypto trading and like, you know, it's totally legal to do overseas trading. It's just you have to report everything. And you know, I'm really scared of like what my tax bill is going to look like if I get into trading or staking or any of that stuff. I mean, you're not a tax attorney, but do you know anything about that?
Nope.
Okay, good.
You know, and well, maybe I have to worry about it too, because I know on last year's taxes they asked, you know, do you hold or trade cryptocurrency?
Yeah, that was on today's too. That's why I was a little bit worried about it. The way that Pavel, my crypto coach, is what I call him. The way he does it, he really tries to skirt around tax laws, and I'm terrified to do that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he trades with a VPN, looking like he's overseas, and you know, he just holds everything. He never cashes out. And to me, it's like, what's the point if you're going to be a full-time crypto trader and not cashing out?
Well, I think,
and you'd have to. I mean, in order to cash out, you'd have to either, you know, report it and pay your taxes or launder it somehow. And I really don't want to get a, you know, murder laundering, or I mean, a money laundering charge.
No. Well, and I think that what is this? In the Matrix, I love the Matrix, and I mention it way too much. I think in the Matrix, Neo turns to he's talking to Morpheus, and I apologize if you're not familiar with the Matrix at all, anyone in the audience. But he turns to him and he says, are you saying that? Are you saying I'm going to be able to dodge bullets like the agents do in the Matrix? And Morpheus turns to Neo and he says, "No, Neo, I'm telling you that when you're ready, you won't need to dodge bullets." And the point of that being is that, well, you'll hold your cryptocurrency and you won't have to worry about it in the future because you'll be able to buy everything that you need with your crypto instead of fiat.
Yeah. But you know what? I right now have a job that I love my job and I love my employer, but I would much rather be, living free. So that's one way to live free is being a trader. So anyway, that's really neither here nor there. I just got access to my BlockFi account. I had to reset my password. If I have an affiliate link, I'm going to send it to you and I'll put it in the show notes as well.
Good.
So you also have talked a lot about the Gestapo. And sort of how they, I don't know, they were sort of the enforcers, right, of like the thought police or whatever in Germany, and so and Nazi Germany. Is that about right?
Yeah. I mean, I think I've read some literature saying that we get the impression in revisionist history that the Gestapo was a huge police force. However, there really wasn't that many of them in terms of numbers, but they mostly ruled through fear and their reputation. And so from the research that I've been able to do, it really looks like what their tactics was to make the bark worse than the bite. Although the bite was pretty bad, but it was the bark itself that is what helped enforce the policies.
So we're recording this on the 13th of February. And so this week, the big story has been Gina Carano and her tweet about how, the lead up to the Holocaust was not just Hitler seizing power and then all of a sudden, kidnapping all the Jews. It started out with like a community movement.
Yeah, and I mean that's really the saddest and most terrifying part about the Holocaust in a way, in my opinion, is that as bad as the SS were, and as bad as the concentration camps and all that was, it was really the story of an untold story in a way, is how the SS was able to turn groups, turn people against their countrymen, and in a way recruit certain segments. They took advantage of these ethnic rivalries in the Eastern Bloc countries. And really in a lot of places it was right that certain ethnic group turning on Jews or gypsies or the other persecuted groups, and neighbors executing neighbors.
Are we headed in that direction, do you think?
I sure hope not. I mean, I really hope that, my one hope is that these social justice warriors are people who are very, very buying into this ideology. I really, truly hope that they really are just a vocal minority. And in a way, even if they are, kind of like the Gestapo was, they made their bark really bad, worse than the bite, but it was that bark in the same way that the SJWs in that whole crowd, they scream and yell the loudest, and they're the ones that get things done, So I don't know if we're headed in that direction. I truly hope not, but I'm afraid of it. There's talks of purging. There was the talks of Truth and Reconciliation committees, which happened before January 20th, but especially after January 6th, they really kind of ramped up. And I really don't know. I'm always an alarmist, and I hate to be hyperbolic, but I could see a future in which that happens. I mean, we see, across the country, people ratting out their neighbors who are having groups of people that are too much. And so I really would advocate, I know you're in the Twin Cities and I'm sure you love it there. But I'm one for smaller towns, really get to know your neighbors if you can't leave.
Yeah, I've been looking into that and thinking about that.
I love the cities too. Of course, you mentioned it in the beginning of the show that we met in the cities. I lived there for 7 or 8 years, and I have very fond memories there.
Yeah, and I guess I've got the added benefit that I'm, quote, a member of the LGBT community or whatever. Mm-hmm. And genuinely, I very much enjoy the company of people who are behind the scenes, not as SJW as they seem in public, which kind of gets back to what we were talking about earlier about the just sort of play acting at your orthodoxy. So there is that. But yeah, I've definitely been seriously considering trying to find a plot of land, if only for the, I love the idea of like being the upper Midwest's, the farm where people have the next Woodstock or even just the next Pork Fest. You know what I mean? Yeah. I love that idea of being like the event host. So I've been looking into that. I've been looking into the idea of buying a few acres if I can swing it financially. But again, that gets back to making money. So
right. Well, I mean, if anything, to have a bug out location, or you live in the cities, but if things really go bad, I don't know, just an idea.
Well, and I've got bug out locations. That's not a huge deal. And actually, my bug out locations are also happen to be gun nuts, so that's pretty great. Because awesome. I'm not super well armed either, which is kind of heresy in our circles. But there we go. Back to like the snitch culture, I guess it's the Gina Carano thing. She did draw a parallel between Jews and, ostensibly she was talking about conservatives. Do you think that conservatives or those on the right are in danger of eventually being legitimately persecuted?
In some way, I think we're already there. Mm-hmm. Just look at least in the internet space. Yes. I think that when it comes to face-to-face personal interaction, my dad, when I was a teenager, he always said, be careful of what you say online because you get into arguments and people say things that they don't mean on the internet. Mm-hmm. In a lot of way, I think it's easy to cancel someone online when all you're really doing is sitting in your living room, in your bathrobe, furiously typing on your phone. But it's another thing, to make a direct comparison to Gina Carano's tweet. It's another thing to run, chase your neighbor through the street and to throw bricks at them.
Right. Right. And I think that's one kind of benefit that our hyper technologized world has. And maybe it's not even a benefit. They didn't need, the capital T, they didn't need to assassinate Donald Trump because they could just use the massive propaganda arm of the state, which, to me is CNN and MSNBC and even Fox News and Twitter and Facebook and all of the sort of shapers of culture to, unperson him, to strip him and the movement that he started from any sort of identity besides the identity that they decide is how to identify them. So that's why I'm a little bit less pessimistic about a coming persecution in the same vein as the Holocaust. But on the other hand, what kind of life is it if all you can do is exist, if your bank has cut you off, if the social networks, which the social networks are the public square, have cut you off. And all you is, a kook on a soapbox with no job and no way of actually supporting yourself.
Yeah.
And that's my black pill coming out.
Yeah. Well, in that same vein, the black pill vein, I think maybe my comparison about chasing someone through the street and throwing a brick at them, that's not quite, I don't think that's quite parallel, but I do think that, in certain situations where if let's say your town is having a referendum and you go and you speak out at a town hall event or something like that, I mean, people legitimately do still in that context get pissed off and want to, cancel someone, or if the school administrator says something bad on social media, there would be an in-person campaign to remove said person. So, yeah, but I do think, not to get even more conspiratorial here, but I sometimes wonder if Donald Trump is not, I wonder if he's not controlled opposition. I don't think he has to be controlled opposition, but I do think the way that they spun him worked so well for what I believe their ultimate end is. If they're wanting to consolidate and centralize control, they did a hell of a good job of identifying everyone whose instinct is to decentralize or to nationalize, which is a form of decentralization, maybe not the one that you and I would posit or advocate for. But I mean, it brought out all those people, it solidified them into an identity, and then it outed them, and then it turned them into domestic terrorists.
And that's very, very convenient for the people who would have authority over them. I definitely, I don't know if Donald Trump was controlled opposition, but I definitely think he was created opposition. They really, really took advantage of his personality, if nothing else.
Right. Yeah.
But, so, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, isn't it damn convenient that the entire the entire terrorist security state, the surveillance state for catching foreign terrorists is now aligned with the cameras pointed inward? That infrastructure is all there and set up, just like we've been saying for, decades now.
Well, yeah, I think that was inevitable too. The post 9/11 propaganda, I was actually just talking on Facebook with someone about this today. The propaganda, like the anti-terrorist propaganda, the see something, say something messaging, I mean, that led directly to like a whole bunch of just terrified parents. And that led to a whole generation of like overprotected, sheltered kids who went to college, 18 years later and demanded and expected the powers that be at those universities to be their parents who were sheltering them and protecting them and keeping them safe from quote unquote harm, real and imagined. And that created this, like, the state is no longer the reactive preventer of danger, but is now the proactive preventer of danger. And so that's why you get people not just accepting, but demanding lockdowns and, executing the insurrectionists. I can't tell you how many tweets I've seen of people who were like, I oppose capital punishment, or even like, I oppose prison. I'm an abolitionist. But man, if anybody should be locked up, it's these people. It's just insane.
Yeah, and I mean, I can speak freely about this now, but at my old job, my bosses were very much in this narrative, and they were, they're boomers, and I don't mean that in a derogatory term. That's literally what they are. Sure. And they eat everything up in terms of this CNN and all the news media cycle. I mean, it amazed me. I mean, Anthony Fauci went on saying that, maybe you should wear 2 masks. And then the next day they come in saying, well, they're saying we need to wear 2 masks. So everyone needs to wear 2 masks in the office now. And it's insane. And I'll tell you again, my aunt works at a local community college, and you will not believe, she works in the department where people will come in and ask like technical help. So students call in and they're asking for things, and it's like the registrars send out an email saying, okay, you need to do A, B, C, and D in order to register for classes, and this is how you do it, or this is how your financial aid is going to work. We're going to pay your tuition first, and then you get the refund check. And they get voluminous calls every single day about, oh, I got this email, what do I do? Or, oh, I need to register for classes, what do I do? And it's no. Okay, well, it's literally is in the email. And it's not just 20-year-olds. No, right. It's not just 18 or 20-year-olds. I mean, it's older folks too. 40, 50, back to school people. It's, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of a mix between like instant gratification, expectation, and just the expectation that we will be told exactly what to do. And if there's any sort of necessity to do any work prior to being told what to do, then we're not, including reading an email, which is work. We're not going to do it.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because, I'm not exempt from this. And I think
me neither.
One of the challenges, right. One of the challenges of being a lawyer is that, and why I think, generally speaking, millennials aren't the best lawyers, just as, in collectivist terms, is because being a lawyer is like you have to be able to figure out the answer for yourself. You have to look at the law, because it's not always, it's not going to hold your hand. You have to look at it. You got to figure it out. You got to solve the puzzle. And it's very much, it's not for people who sit back and are like, okay, well, teacher, tell me what to do, or how do I do this assignment? It's the people who roll up their sleeve and it's like, okay, I'm going to tinker around with this until it fits, kind of thing. So it's interesting.
That said, I mean, and maybe it's both boomers and millennials have this expectation to be told what to do. But, I mean, like you said, the boomers at your employer were, just following orders. And I mean, my parents are boomers. They're kind of on the tail end of the baby boom, but they still fall in the technical parameters, I guess. They're conservative boomers. And so they have really, and especially my mom, have fallen completely in line with the QAnon stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like my mom was waiting for, messages from these she sent me this video of this guy just sitting in a messy office, setting dates. I mean, it's almost like, 19th century Seventh-day Adventists with the date setting stuff. Like, oh, just wait until, January 1st or January 6th, or now I think it's like March 30th or whatever. Like they're convinced that these dates are going to come and something's going to come to pass. The one thing was Apple was going to release an update to iOS where they're turning off Amber Alerts so that President Trump can't communicate with the people. Now that he's off Twitter, he was going to, I guess, use the emergency alert system to send messages. And then,
can I ask, are your parents religious?
Well, they yes, my dad is religious. My mom was religious. And then she kind of went on her own little spiritual path. But they definitely follow the authorities wherever they go. So when they're religious, they do whatever the church says. And, when they find a pundit to latch onto, that person is always right. I remember, my dad opposed the Iraq War, because John Paul II said to oppose the Iraq War. And I opposed the Iraq War because I was on the left at the time. And so we had that in common. But then years later, my dad, who disapproved of George W. Bush, became sort of a tribalist Republican. And because David Letterman made fun of George W. Bush, he started to like George W. Bush. And even to the point where after everyone in the country had come to oppose the Iraq War, my dad was all of a sudden in the, well, he had to do something camp, where like, it's just really weird. He's the only person I know who's flip-flopped in the other direction on Iraq. And it's all because of, the person in whose tribe he belonged was persecuted by the other tribe.
I've been very pleasantly surprised by, as long as we're on the topic of family, I've been very proud of and pleasantly surprised by my family and their reaction to the COVID situation. I think it's because, I've been a kook since I became, a voluntarist.
Yeah.
And I've been saying the sky is falling, and I've been saying, we're entering a police state, we're all the things that you and I know and the audience probably knows, so I won't recount them. But I think that as things started to come to pass in some way, maybe this is just my self-aggrandizement, but in some way I felt like they've been acknowledging that, yes, I've been annoyingly proselytizing about the good word of voluntarism, but they've been acknowledging that things are going in that direction, and they're pissed off about it. They are not indignant, but they're set against it. They're gritting their teeth, trying to resist. My mom has become, more of a. She's also flirted with not QAnon, but flirted with, the alternative scientists coming out talking against COVID. But when someone is newer to this space, it's interesting to watch them go through phases that you went through.
Yeah. Well, and my at least my mom I know was very, very anti-COVID restrictions kind of from the beginning. Actually, I think she was anti-mask before I was even anti-mask, which is surprising because I was like, masks are it's just common sense. Of course they're gonna stop the droplets or whatever. Since then, I've come to realize that the science just isn't there. I'm not sure where my dad was on all that. I know he's kind of a rule follower, so he would put his mask on when we would go inside places and stuff. When I was down there last time, they live in Texas, and
okay.
And I know he's like really excited to get the vaccine, and I think he's excited to get the vaccine because like Trump was talking up the vaccine. I could be wrong about that. But like, I just know, like, I've seen him comment on family. Like, I've got an uncle who's a doctor. I think it was him, or maybe his daughter who's a nurse. One of them got the vaccine, and my dad commented, "Oh, I can't wait till I can get my vaccine." Like, like it's an aspirational thing.
Right.
I mean, it's sweet, and I don't begrudge a 60-year-old. It will potentially save his life, and he's had serious health problems too. Like, I'm not completely anti-vax. I'm probably not going to get it just because I don't really see the need for it, and I have adverse reactions to flu vaccines, so I just wouldn't get it anyway, unless I've got concert tickets in September. So I bought concert tickets almost a year in advance. I'm that excited. But like, if it's required in order to get in the concert, maybe I'll get it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the vaccine is a line in the sand. I would have quit my last job over it had they required it. Yeah.
Thankfully, I work in a remote job. Like, my employer is is worldwide, and they're based in Georgia. So I don't have to worry about that so much. Like, I'm going to be working via Zoom even after everything reopens, if it ever happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, it's the symbology of it. It's the bodily autonomy issue with it. And, I think in my opinion, it was always folly to assume that it would be law that you would need to get vaccinated.
Right.
Although the precedent is there. I'll emphasize that it was tangent here. Buck v. Bell was a Supreme Court case in which Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. wrote the primary. He wrote the majority opinion, saying that it was constitutional for the state basically to what is the word? Sterilize someone against their will. This was Carrie Buck. She was considered mentally defective. She was born out of wedlock, someone who was in a institution, and she was the spawn of folks who were, they were out of wedlock for generations. And I think I don't know if it was an incestual relationship or something like that. But Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. wrote the opinion that allowed the state to sterilize her. I'd encourage everyone to read the opinion. If we can throw it in the show notes page. He, in his fashion, I mean, he was a positive law advocate. He was kind of, I don't want to go out and say that he was a progressive because I've done some research on it and I can't say that for certain. But he said,
and when you say that, you mean like a formal member of the progressive movement, right?
Yes. Yeah. Capital P. Yeah, I can't say that for certain. His judicial philosophy is kind of varied. He's kind of a loose cannon. It's hard to pin him down. He is an advocate of, central planning, and he was a eugenicist as far as I can tell as well. But if you read his language, it's awful. 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. And surely if the state can reach far enough to vaccinate someone against their will, that can reach as far as the uterine cords when you get your tube tied. Yeah. And basically where I was getting at with this is that the case that Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. relied upon to write the opinion that would allow for that would allow for involuntary sterilization was a case where the Supreme Court ruled that it was constitutional to allow to legislate mandatory vaccinations. So I wanted to write, one of my Substack articles about this, but there's already precedent saying that the state can make it mandatory to vaccinate you. That's my understanding.
God, who's the lawyer? I think he was like oh my God. He's Alan Dershowitz. Didn't he come out with a similar position on that?
He did. And I'll have to reach out. Oh, I have this video. I think I saved it. He did. And it was very striking. It was disturbing. I'll have to put it in the show notes page for everyone. I'm making a lot of work for you.
Thanks. Just send me the links. I'll I'm pulling up most of them as we kind of go along. I have a ton of tabs open already. All right, cool. Well, Patrick, what is before we get to you plugging your socials and your podcast and all that, which everyone should subscribe to, what advice would you give someone who wants to like survive and thrive in the next weird decade or so that's coming up?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm trying to learn new skills. I'm trying to accumulate practical resources. I'm trying to establish connections with my community, and I'm trying to network with like-minded individuals. So I think, this is something I talk about quite a bit in my work is freedom in an unfree world. Is Harry Brown wrote this book, and afterwards I found out that my John Bircher grandpa, made my mom read this when she was a teenager. She told me about this. But he said, there's so many ways that the state controls you without even controlling you overtly, like with legislation. And the more you allow yourself to be consumed with the fact that you're not free, the less free you are. So what you really have to do is create freedom in your own life through other ways, like, increasing your wealth, increasing your free time, or at least doing what you love to do, having meaningful relationships. A lot of it is just a life philosophy. So I think it's important to not get swept up in the politics of it, but be informed and make sure that, you know, you're benefiting from the experience. You're becoming a better person, a more well-rounded person, a more informed person, but not an unhappy person or an angry person. So that's maybe my life advice that I try to follow. Not always the best. But on the other hand, like I said, you know, get reloading components, get ammunition, get firearms. More important, well, have those, but more important than that, have access to a water supply. Buy bargaining things like whiskey. Go get Evan Williams whiskey is $20 for a freaking 175. Get a bunch of those. I mean, that's going to be gold if things really go bad. Cans of tuna, you know, all the prepper stuff. Know that essential household items are going to be just as valuable if things really go south as cryptocurrency or fiat currency or even gold bullion or silver. So that would be my advice, you know, aside from learning practical skills and networking with your neighbors and friends.
Awesome. Thanks. And so that being said, where can people find you?
Yeah, so everyone can find me at libertyweekly.net. I'm on almost every social media platform you can conceive of. You know, Instagram. I would point everyone to the alts, actually. MeWe, Minds, Float.app. Subscribe to me on Library, libertyweekly.net/LBRY. That's an invite. We'll both, if you make an account, we'll both get the 8 LBC, the cryptocurrency it runs on. So find me on all those. I'm also on Substack, libertyweekly.net/Substack. So I really appreciate you having me on, man. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, totally. It was good to talk to you again. All right. Thanks again to Patrick for joining me today. Thank you for listening. Be sure you head over to palomaverdestore.com and use Blackbird at checkout. Also, make sure that you're hitting that subscribe button if you're not already subscribed. And if you have not yet subscribed to the Substack, where you will get not only email updates not only for episodes of this show, but also written content that I publish, head to blackbird.substack.com to sign up today. Of course, there are two options, one free, one paid. The paid option right now, if you sign up for the free option, you will get every episode of the show and every piece of public written content that I produce. The premium subscription will one of these days feature premium content along with bonus episodes of the show. And in addition to that, you just get the satisfaction of knowing that you're helping me out. So thanks again for joining today. Thanks again for sharing the show. And until next time, live free.